Good evening and welcome to Living Manna Church. Hi, I'm Pastor Dave Sain, Senior Shepherd here at Living Manna. Thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. It's Wednesday night. Of course, that means Bible study for us. We got a good one for you tonight. Got some interesting stuff to talk about. Before we jump into all of that, let me just get a couple of these commercials out of the way. If you're joining us for the first time, please, please, please hit the subscribe button so that you're notified every time that we go live, and also hit the bell there so this way you're notified every time that we go live. But subscribe to us and certainly give us a thumbs up. If you enjoy the message, if you get something out of it, give us a thumbs up. This way, the algorithm will send us out to other people that are like-minded, looking for similar information, and hopefully we can reach a lot more people. Okay, so with that out of the way, here we are. It's Wednesday night Bible study. We've got some interesting stuff to talk about tonight. Tonight's Bible study, let me pop this up so you guys can see it. This is sort of number 3 in our sub-series because we've been in the series of The Pattern for a while. And this is still part of the pattern, but we've been talking about the temple. So this is going to be our third one on the temple. Today's topic and title is called The True Temple. We talked about the third temple last week. We're going to talk about the true temple this week. But before we jump into that, I did want to do something. I did want to let you guys know something. Let me just, here. We have obviously the feast days are coming up really, really quick. I cannot believe it is September already. October. I went to the store today. Sister Karen and I were at the store, and amazingly, oh, sorry guys, I got a little issue here. All right, Sister Karen and I went to the store today, and I sent a little post out on Manna Eaters, our local chat room. And I saw Christmas stuff out already, you know, Santa Claus and the reindeer and the snowmen and Christmas trees. And my goodness, it's not even mid-September yet. And this stuff is out already. It's just like it gets pushed earlier and earlier and earlier. So you can check out Manna Eaters. You can see the picture I posted. But I just find it incredible that we push this stuff even as early as we do right now. But what I have up there on the screen, let me make this a little bit bigger so you guys can all see it. This is the upcoming calendar. And I'm so sorry for all the technical difficulties we had last week with Hidden Manna. And we're actually not going to be having Hidden Manna for a couple of weeks, right till after the end of the fall feast. We're going to pick up Hidden Manna again, and I'll let you know exactly when. Right now on this chart, we use the calendar from Lion and Lamb Ministries, and so this is their calendar. I just made a copy of it. This is their calendar, and some dear brethren noticed that, because originally I said that, and if you look on the calendar here, let me see if I can mark it. It has the 17th as a high Sabbath for the Feast of Trumpets. However, the Feast of Trumpets actually starts on the 15th, and you can see because they put a little new moon. You can see the little black new moon up there. That's when the Feast of Trumpets begins. And the difference is, if you start it here on the 16th, then it's not 10 days before the day of Yom Kippur, which is here on the 25th. And so it actually starts on the eve of on the 15th. So, and this has to do with some Jewish tradition. There is a tradition of having 2 days for trumpets, the first day and the second day, because it took so long for everybody to light the fires and everybody to understand that trumpets was upon us. And I believe that there's a Jewish tradition as well of not having the Sabbath and the high Sabbath bump up on the same day. They want it on separate days. But again, that's just old tradition. So for us, and how does this relate to us? Just so everybody knows that it'll start on the 15th, and it will be 10 days until the high Sabbath of Yom Kippur. But that makes the Sabbath of the 16th, and let me just use a different color here. That makes our regular Shabbat service on the 16th not just a Sabbath, but it makes it a high Sabbath. A little bit different than the Jewish tradition, but it's tradition. We're trying to, as much as is possible, to try to actually do what it is that Moses instructed us to do. And I get it. I know. Obviously, we're not doing everything Moses instructed us to do. And you'll find out why a little bit tonight as we talk about the temple. But I just wanted everybody to realize that that trumpets will start on the 15th. That would be a Friday to us. We will celebrate it on the 16th. during our Shabbat service. And that will be a high Sabbath for us too. So really the high Sabbath is the regular Sabbath. And then on the 25th, here is the Day of Atonement. That will be the actual Day of Atonement. There's no real service that we do. I mean, we'll celebrate it. On the 23rd, we'll do some sort of a service, and we'll teach about it. We're going to teach about all the fall feast days in the next couple of weeks. We're going to be sharing all of this stuff. So all of this stuff is going to be coming up. But I just wanted to highlight that for everybody. We're going to make the changes on the calendar as well. So this way you realize there are definitely 10 days between. Those are the days of awe, which is a very, very important part of the whole prophetic story. 10 days of awe between the beginning of the Feast of Trumpets and the beginning of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So I just wanted to make that clear for everybody. And also to let you guys know, because here's the next tile. This is October. This is the next month. This is October. Actually, let me go back just a second. So here on the 30th begins the Feast of Tabernacles, right? And that'll be our celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles. And just so you realize that it goes all the way through, and here's here's another picture of the calendar. It starts on the 30th, and it will go all the way through to the 7th. And that will be our Feast of Tabernacles. And don't forget, we are going to have a service on, let me back up here just a second so you guys can, I know I'm probably confusing everybody. We're going to have a service. That's October. Sorry, I went to the wrong one. We're going to have a service here on the 30th, an in-house study, a regular service, a regular Shabbat service. And then we are also going to have a Wednesday night Bible study. Here it is on the 4th. We have a Wednesday night Bible study in-house. We haven't had an in-house Bible study because normally we do Wednesday, online the way we're doing it now. But we'll have a Wednesday Bible study on the 4th. And then, of course, we will have our service on the 7th. And we're going to be talking about some really, really crazy stuff. The mark of the beast, the name of the beast, all of that kind of stuff, 666. We're going to try to really go through all of that in some detail and hopefully get a good explanation for everybody. And so we invite you to be with us both on the Shabbats, on those Saturdays, and on that Wednesday. And of course, we're going to be having fellowships and food and hanging out. And then in between the weeks, one day, I haven't even decided which day, but I really want to have a Zoom call again. We'll let you guys know by next week what the Zoom call date is, because we got a lot of LMC family that's not here, not part of what we do here. And we definitely want to hang out with you guys too. And so we'll let you know about that. But that's just sort of the basic information, so you guys get it. And I apologize for the mistake there, but I just wanted to clarify that for everybody. And it will be posted on Living Manna Church app, so you guys can check it out. The only real difference is, rather than Sunday being a high Sabbath, Saturday will be the high Sabbath. All right. So with all of that kind of out of the way, let's open up with a word of prayer. And we'll jump right into this for tonight. Abba, give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart that is willing to obey. In the Master's name, amen. Amen. All right, so today is called the True Temple. The True Temple. As you can tell, similar backgrounds to all the other studies. They all bump up to each other. They're all part of the pattern that we've been talking about. This is a really important one. And I really hope that you've watched the previous studies, because really the only way you're going to catch on to all of this is watching it study after study after study, because there is so much information to share with you. We only have a limited amount of time to do it, and I'm trying to do it as quickly as I can, but also as thoroughly as I can, so that we all understand. And beloved, there is no way to understand what the real, not all the stuff we hear, what the real abomination of desolation, and even the transgression of desolation, believe it or not, there's two different things, but what the abomination of desolation is truly about. It is impossible to begin to share that information with you without this as a background. We have to know this stuff first. And so that's why we're spending some time doing this. And hopefully, as we get closer to the fall feast days, we'll be able to share all that other information. And honestly, guys, it is mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. It's illuminating. It's a bit scary, actually, once you realize what it's all about. And then when you realize what it's all about, you realize how far-fetched the lies, the deception really is. Okay, so here we go. The true temple. Let's go over a couple things. I don't want to do a whole review from where we were. You can go back and you can watch the previous two studies. We're already running a little bit behind tonight, so I don't want to go back and do a review of everything. But it is so important. It is vitally important that we understand the progression from the literal, that is the example that Abba has given us here on earth, to the spiritual truth. You have to get that. If you don't get that, you're going to be lost. We're going to be lost in all sorts of different ways, but certainly you're going to be lost in the study, but you're going to be lost in your understanding. So here's just a couple things. Let me pop this up so you guys can, let me make it a little bit bigger so I can make some comments here. We're starting right here. Everything given on earth, and by everything, I'm just going to list a couple things, but it's more than just this, but everything, the temple, the altar, the law, the sacrifices, the priesthood, everything is but an example. It is a teaching tool that Abba has given to us to show us the reality. So here's the deal. If you get rid of the teaching tool, there's no way to know the truth. And that's sort of the dilemma a lot of us face right now. So you can't get rid of the teaching tool, but you have to understand it's a teaching tool. It has a purpose, and its purpose is to get us to understand spiritual truth. The mysteries. Spent a lot of time talking about the mysteries. I don't know, for like 5 or 6 weeks between Shabbat and between Wednesdays about the mystery language. We've been talking about the mysteries for a long time. We must wrap our minds around this transference from the literal to the spiritual truth, to the mysteries, because the mysteries, the spiritual truth, is the true plan of the Creator, Abba. Everything else is an example. We are expected, I'm right here so you guys can follow me along. We are expected to understand the transfer from, and I'm going to put a whole bunch of different ways. They all mean the same thing. And I could probably list another 3 or 4 different ways, but we are to understand that things have transferred, things have moved, things have changed from the literal to the spiritual, or from the earthly to the heavenly, or from the letter to the spirit, or from the milk to the meat, or from the example to the reality. All of those things apply. They all say the same thing. I just wanted to say it multiple different ways so that we would get it. Here's the issue, though. Sadly, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they have not understood this vital truth that things changed, that there is an earthly and that there is a spiritual, the difference between the old wine and the new wine. And because they miss this vital truth, this vital understanding that we need eyes to see and ears to hear, the mystery remains for them. They can't see it. They don't understand it. All sorts of different doctrines and ideas and beliefs and et cetera, but they don't see the story. They don't get the whole story. They are stuck, and here it is. I put it down here. They are stuck on the milk, or stuck on the letter, or stuck on the earthly. They do not have eyes to see and ears to hear. Doesn't mean they're not sincere. Doesn't mean they're not religious. It does mean they don't understand. And the whole idea of this is that we understand. Here, the third note down here. They, meaning Islam, Christianity, Judaism, they are all focused on the literal, on the earthly, on the letter, even though, in different ways, you've got, Christianity has their perspective, Islam has their perspective, Judaism has their perspective, but they're all stuck on the literal. They are all, for all of them, all three of those religions are focused on the Temple Mount. That is in Jerusalem, in the Jerusalem in the Middle East today, in Israel today. They are all focused on the Temple Mount. They're all focused on a new temple or a third temple. Some want it, others despise it. Some just want to possess the Temple Mount. Others want to kick everybody off the Temple Mount and do something else. Or they're focused on the third temple because there's a belief that an antichrist, even from an Islamic perspective, someone's going to come from the temple. Beloved, and I know how this sounds. I get it. It sounds offensive. It's all deception. It's all deception to get us to look in one direction while really the truth is in an entirely different direction. And I don't say this lightly, but this, we must understand how things moved from the literal to the spiritual. And it's not just now. This concept of the literal has been going on, for almost 2,000 years. How many wars and battles and millions of people have died over that land in Jerusalem, over that land on the Temple Mount, and how many more will? Because if they keep doing what they want to do on the Temple Mount, that's World War III, or at least that's a Middle Eastern conflict that's about to kick off. More people will die over the deception. And I know people are gung-ho about a third temple. They're gung-ho about an antichrist, some guy, some political leader coming out of the Middle East. Beloved, I'm telling you, it's deception. It is to get us to look in one direction while the reality is even bigger. It's even bigger than what we would call a third temple or a red heifer or antichrist or all of those kind of things. Excuse me. Take a sip of my cranberry juice. Okay, so we're all focused in one direction, the earthly, the literal, not understanding the transition from the literal to the spiritual. And, of course, at the fullness of time, the scripture tells us, Father sends the Messiah. To do what? To teach us the true meaning of the Torah and the prophets, from the literal to the spiritual. And beloved, we are supposed to, especially now, especially since we are at the end of the sixth day, if there has ever been a people who should wrap their minds around the whole thing, it ought to be us. We are supposed to know the truth. And if you know the truth will set you free. And it really does. It sets you free from the deception. It gives you a different perspective of everything that is going on. And hopefully over the next couple of weeks and what we have done and what we are going to do, you'll get a chance to see that and understand that. So this is my review. Take it. Certainly go back, listen to the other studies. But I cannot stress how important it is that we make that jump. We make that leap in understanding that the physical is done, the literal is done, the letter is done, the example is done. Doesn't mean it's thrown away. Doesn't mean it's abolished. It means that's not what we're doing. Now we are supposed to understand what all of those things actually meant. And with that, let's take a look at a couple of things. And I just said this just briefly, but the temple, obviously there's no temple, right? I mean, there hasn't been a temple for, almost 2,000 years, just under 2,000 years. And of course, that is the issue today, as it has been for a long time. And why? Because Messiah told us no more worship in Jerusalem. That literal was going to come to an end. Now we are looking for Jerusalem, but not that Jerusalem. We, as the Apostle Paul tells us in Galatians, are looking for the Jerusalem that is above. The law, let's take a look at this here. Just a really important statement, because I know people get really tied up on this. The law is not abolished. So just because we understand the spiritual doesn't mean the law is abolished. As a matter of fact, it means the very opposite. The law is not abolished. It has been transferred. It has been changed. It has been moved to the kingdom of our God, its true meaning in Abba. Here's the Master's words in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 17, that I hope now, if you understand that, if you can wrap your mind around that, this would make a little bit more sense to you. When the Master says in the Gospel of Matthew during the Sermon on the Mount, do not think that I came to destroy, to abolish the Torah. He didn't. That's not his purpose, or the prophets. I did not come to destroy or abolish, but to complete, to bring the true meaning, the true heavenly meaning, to move it from the literal to the spiritual, to show us the mysteries of the kingdom of Elohim, the kingdom of God. Here's Hebrews chapter 7. And all this is, I guess, a little bit of review for us. Hebrews chapter 7 and verse 12. Here it is. Guys, here it is. The writer of Hebrews is pulling no punches. He's just, and it sounds like the Apostle Paul to me, but whoever it is pulling no punches, and he is explicitly telling us, Hebrews chapter 7, verse 12, for the priesthood being changed. The priesthood, and not just the priesthood, the temple, the sacrifices, all that goes with it. For the priesthood being changed, of necessity, it is necessary. If Abba changed the priesthood, if he's no longer giving an earthly example, but the reality of everything he was trying to teach us has now come, there takes place a change, not an abolishment, not a getting rid of, but a change, a transfer of the Torah, of the law as well. Meaning the law, everything that goes on in the temple, all the thing with the priest, all of that has been, it's not ended. It's not abolished. It's not over. Say, well, there's no temple. There's no Levitical priesthood. But that's supposed to end. Messiah told us that was going to end. But the temple didn't end. The priesthood didn't end. The sacrifices didn't. None of that has ended. It is still going on today. It is just going on in the reality of what Abba always intended for it to be, not in the example that he let us have for a time until Messiah would come. Here is the book of Hebrews, chapter 5 and verse 1. I hope some of these verses sort of enlighten you, open up your eyes, and certainly pay close attention to the PDP versions. That's what you see there in yellow, and everything else highlighted. I'm just trying to highlight that particular verse so that you guys can get a better picture. So here's Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 1. It says for every, so he's talking about this transfer of the priesthood, and he's given us the example of Messiah. It says for every priest taken from among men is appointed. And I put the PDP version, even though it's going to say it a little bit later on, just so you get the gist. Every priest that comes into the priesthood has been appointed by Father. You can't just, Abba chose Aaron and it chose his family. So all the priests that come are appointed by Abba on behalf of men, meaning the children of Israel, in matters. In other words, to teach the children of Israel, to teach all men everywhere how to approach Elohim in matters relating to Elohim. The priests, and here's what the priests do, this is real important, they offer both gifts and offerings for sin. So when he says gifts, he means the different sacrifices, all the different, go to Leviticus and you can read all the different sacrifices. You need to keep the letter because they have spiritual truth in them that we need to understand to help us understand what's going on now. So what's the job of a priest? The job of a priest is to offer, I'm just going to highlight here so you can see, to offer both gifts and offerings for sins. Being able to have a measure of feeling that the priest can identify with the people with whom he is giving these gifts and offerings on their behalf. So he says, being able to have a measure of feeling to identify with men for those not knowing and being led astray. The whole purpose of the priesthood is to bring people into the faith, to show them the way into Abba, to show them the way of holiness. How do we approach Elohim? With gifts and slaughter offerings. It says, since, and I'm reading right here so you guys can follow me, since he himself, meaning the priest, is also surrounded by weakness, meaning they're all sinful men. Even the priests are sinful men. So there's an offering that has to be given for them. In fact, it says it itself. And on account of this, he has to offer for sins. As for the people, he offers gifts and sin sacrifices. So also for himself. And no, so what's the job of a priest? To offer up gifts and offerings for a people who have been led astray, to teach them how to come to Father in the way Father has prescribed, but also so that the priest, being like the people, can identify with them and understand their weaknesses and their frailties and their failures, and help them to come closer to be holy, to be cleansed, to walk away from those things in order to come closer to Father. That's the job of a priest. And here in green it says, and no one obtains this glory, this job, for himself. You can't just wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be a priest. And back in the day, you can't just say, I'm going to be a Levitical priest. No, you're not. Even if you're part of the Levitical tribe, doesn't mean you're going to be a priest, because Father ordained a particular group of people to be so. So no one obtains this glory for himself, but he who is called of Elohim. So only Father calls the priests. Now look at this. So no one obtains this glory for himself, but he who is called of Elohim, even as Aaron was also called. So this is, referring back to Aaron, back to the beginning. So the beginning is important. You can't just get rid of it. Look at this. This is so important, guys. So also, in the same way, equal to, comparable to, so also the Messiah did not extol himself. In other words, the Messiah didn't come saying, I'm high priest. The Messiah didn't take the mantle of high priest upon himself. The Messiah, like every other priest, comes as a man in flesh, just like us, with all the frailties of flesh. And I get it. Yes, it says he did not sin, but he took sin on himself. So just like all the priests that ever came before him, an offering must be made for the people who have gone astray and for the priests, because they are subject to the frailty of the flesh. And while Messiah may not have sinned, he became sin for us, meaning the offering also covered him. Now, I know that's tough for people to wrap their minds around, but he's saying so also in everything he just said about the priest, so also Messiah is doing the same thing. So also the Messiah did not extol himself to become high priest, but it was he, meaning Father, who said to him, you are my son. Today I have brought you forth. This is Psalm 20, chapter 2, verse 7 that he's referring to. He also says in another place, another Psalm, Psalm 110, verse 4, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. So what did the priests of old do? They led those that were astray back to Elohim, taught the instruction on how to come, offered up gift offerings and sin offerings, both for the people and for themselves. Messiah has done the same thing. And the offering of the priest is continual. Because every morning the priest would get up and you would have the morning oblation, the morning offering that's given. And that would allow ministry to go on throughout the day in the temple that people could come. And then in the evening, you'd have the evening oblation, the evening sacrifice, and that would sort of close it for the day. And then the next morning, you open it up again with the morning oblation. All of those things are still going on. They're just not going on in Jerusalem. They're not going on in a physical temple, but they are going on because there's a priesthood. And just like there needs to be a transfer, if there's a transfer of the priesthood, there is a transfer of the Torah or the law to its spiritual reality from its earthly example. Guys, I hope that you guys are getting this. This is so important. This is what the whole book of Hebrews is about, teaching us about that transference from one thing to another. Not the removal of, not the abolishing of, not the destroying of the Torah, the transfer of the Torah, making it bigger than we could ever imagine. All right, here's Exodus chapter 25, and certainly this goes in line with everything we've been talking about with regards to the pattern. Exodus chapter 25 and verse 8. This is when Moses is told to set up the tabernacle for the first time. You should read all of Exodus 21, 22, 20, all the way to 25. It'll give you all sorts of information on, the measurements and the gold and the silver and the clothing. All of that is important. All of that has spiritual truth to it that teaches us something later on. So you got to know the literal, even still today. While we may not be under the literal, we maybe can't go to Jerusalem and do the literal, we still need to understand it to understand the spiritual. So here's Exodus chapter 25, verse 8. At the end of all of that, look at what Abba says to Moses. So this idea of moving from the literal to the spiritual isn't something that just pops up when Messiah comes here. Father's been telling us this. Excuse me. Abba's been telling us this since the beginning. It's just we didn't have eyes to see it. Or not everybody had eyes to see it. Some did. Most did not. And even today, still, the vast majority, just don't see it. So here's Exodus chapter 25 and verse 8. It says, "And they shall make me a set-apart place, a temple, a tabernacle. And I shall dwell in their midst, according to all that I show you." The pattern, here it is, whole topic of everything we're talking about. The pattern of the dwelling place, the pattern of the temple, the pattern of the tabernacle, and the pattern of all its furnishings. And there's no way for us to do all of this information just on one study today. It'll take us a while to do it. But everything in the tabernacle, everything in the temple is a pattern of something else. And what is Moses told? Make it exactly so. Here it is. I made it. I highlighted it, made it nice and bold so it pops out at you. Make it exactly so. Why? Because Father's intention right from the beginning is that it was not about an earthly tabernacle, not about an earthly temple. It was about something much bigger that the earthly had to mimic it in every way to teach us the lessons. So we fast forward again to the book of Hebrews, one of my favorite books, book of Hebrews. Here's chapter 8 and verse 1. And so the writer of Hebrews, again, I think it's Saul, but the writer of Hebrews is now telling us in verse 1, it says here, "Now the summary of what we are saying is this: we have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of greatness in the heavens." Not a high priest who's serving in a temple or tabernacle in Jerusalem, who is seated at the right hand of the throne of greatness. And verse 2, and who serves according to the Torah. But the Torah, its true meaning, is much bigger now. But all of the copies tell us something about this service. And what the earthly example tells us is he serves every day. The priests serve every day in the set apart place, in the tabernacle or the temple. And he tells us in the set apart place and of the true tent or true tabernacle. So here it is. The writer of Hebrews is telling us, yeah, there's the earthly, but we're telling you, no, this is much bigger. There's the spiritual. This story's gotten so much bigger. And the Torah has been changed, transferred to this bigger reality. It's actually, if you think about it, it's been transferred back to what it was in the first place. It was transferred down to us. And I know this sounds kind of tough, but it was sort of dumbed down so that we could understand it. And now we're supposed to understand it and apply it to its original meaning. So he says, who serves in the set apart place and of the true tent, which Yah set up. Man didn't set this up. Father set up that tent, that temple, that tabernacle. Abba set that up way before you and I were even a thought. Way before the existence of all things. As he spoke creation into existence, this tabernacle already existed. And not man. This isn't something. This is not the thing in Jerusalem. This is not the thing everybody's working towards. This is not the thing everybody's fighting over. This is not the thing that's going to cause World War III. This is not the thing an Antichrist is going to come out. That's look over here, because it's deception. It is a copy that's there to teach. Verse 3 says, "For every high priest, including Messiah, including Yeshua, is appointed." We just finished reading that in Hebrews chapter 5. Father appoints. Messiah didn't take this mantle on himself. Abba gave it to him. He has compassion on us because he's human like us. He knows what we're going through. The offering was for us and for him. He became sin for us. For every high priest, including Yeshua, is appointed to offer both gifts and slaughter offerings. Wait a minute, you're telling me Messiah right now is doing a morning oblation and an evening oblation and gifts and sacrifices and all the different... Yes. That is exactly what the scripture is telling us. That the temple, while it may have been destroyed on earth, was not destroyed. It has always been there. It's just been waiting for the real high priest. Again, verse 3 says, "For every high priest, including Yeshua, is appointed to offer both gifts and slaughtering offerings. So it was also necessary." In the same way, Messiah is doing the same thing. So it was also necessary for this one, meaning the high priest, Messiah, to have somewhat to offer. Just like the priest on earth, Messiah has to. And of course, the offering is his own blood. But it goes beyond that, because there's still a morning oblation and an evening oblation and sacrifices and sin sacrifices and fellowship offerings and burnt offerings. And all of these other things are still going on today. Verse 4 says, "For if indeed he," meaning Messiah, "were on earth, he would not be a priest." Why? Because what's on earth is a copy. It's a teaching. It's a tool. It's an aid to get us to understand the bigger picture. It is the literal or the letter helping us to understand the spiritual. Since there are priests who offer gifts according to the Torah, and I gotta think that when this is written, the temple is still going on, though Messiah told us it's coming down. And of course, within probably a few years of writing this book, it did come down. But since there are priests who offer gifts according to the Torah, and here it is, verse 5, who do what? Who serve as a copy and a shadow of the heavenly. I know people read this all the time, but we don't get what he's saying. This thing has been moved. Not changed, not abolished, but yes, changed, transferred. It has a bigger meaning than we could ever imagine. Serve as a copy and a shadow of the heavenly, as Moses was warned when he was about to make the tent. For he said, the same verses we just read in Exodus 25, "See that you make it according to the pattern shown you on the mountain, until the real high priest comes." And then the real ministry starts. Then the real priesthood starts. Then the real offerings start. At least the understanding of those things is supposed to start. And like I said before, at this point, guys, we're supposed to know this. We're supposed to wrap our minds around it. And very, very few truly understand this change from the earthly to the spiritual. All right, so let's go on. The copy and the reality. So I want to focus on three things: the tent, the high priest, and the altar. Now there's more things. There's the menorah, there's the table of showbread, there's all the other furnishings, and it's impossible to get into that tonight. There's just not enough time left to do all that. But I want to focus on these three, or at least give you a little bit of information on these three. Because honestly, we could do a deep dive into all of this, but it will take us weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and it's a humongous study. So I'm gonna try to do cliff notes here, try to give you the best information I can, and hopefully that'll open up your eyes and you can follow up on studies on your own. So, three things: the tent, or the tabernacle, or the temple later on under David and Solomon. The temple, the tent, is a body. It's a house where Father chooses to dwell. Okay, fair enough definition. The high priests and all of the priests are there, we've just read in Hebrews, to offer both gifts and slaughterings, the daily oblation, the morning and evening, and to offer on the feast days the Passover lamb. That's what went on in the temple. And third, the altar. The altar is the heart of the tabernacle. It is the place where every worshiper is cleansed, where every worshiper has an offering given on their behalf. It is the heart of the tabernacle. It's the heart of where the Passover is given. It is the heart where the gifts are given. It is the heart where the slaughter offerings are presented, and everything else that goes on in the tabernacle. So I'm just going to focus on these three. Again, there's much, much more to say, just not enough time to do it. Here is the reality, guys. Abba has been telling us about this transference for a long time. It's just, we didn't have eyes to see it. We couldn't wrap our minds around it. We still don't today. Most religion still doesn't get it today. They either just reject everything or we're just stuck in the old wine. Abba, I'm going to just highlight this so you guys can see it. I'm right here. Abba never wanted, I know, wrap your minds around this. Abba never wanted or intended for the earthly example to be the be-all and do-all. It's just an example. Here's Psalms chapter 51. And what's wonderful is there were prophets that kind of got this, including King David. Here's Psalm chapter 51, verses 16 and 17. Abba's been telling us this transference from the literal to the spiritual for a long time. It says, "For you do not," and I put there in the PDP version, "ever," have never. "For you do not desire slaughtering," sacrifices. Or I would give it, "You do not delight in ascending offerings." The slaughterings of Elohim. So here's a definition for you. He's telling us, he's moving from the literal to the spiritual. He's telling us what this is really about. The slaughterings of Elohim are a broken spirit, a heart, the altar within us, that heart, a heart broken and crushed before Father to come into his presence. So one more time, the slaughterings of Elohim are a broken spirit, a heart broken and crushed, O Elohim. These you do not despise. So what is David telling us all the way back here? Though there is a tabernacle, though there was Shiloh, though eventually his son's going to set up a temple, is that what Abba really wanted? No, David knew his body was the temple. David knew the real altar is not a slaughter offering that Abba wanted, but it's what goes on inside of our heart. Here's Psalm chapter 40, verse 6. "Slaughterings and meal offerings you did not desire. You have opened my ears." You opened my ears to what? To the spiritual truth. So here's David again realizing, wait a minute, it's not about this. It's about something bigger. But the example, the only way we learn the bigger, the only way the people that are confused and led astray learn the truth is by going through the literal, is by doing the physical, is by doing the earthly. They'll begin to understand the spiritual. At least that was the plan. So it says, "You have opened my ears to spiritual truth, eyes to see, ears to hear, heart willing to obey. Ascending offering and sin offerings you did not ask for. Why? Because they were a teaching aid. They always were, since the day Moses brought them into being, up until the day of King David, up until the day of Messiah. They are a teaching aid. Let's look at a couple of more verses. The true meaning of things. Here is the book of Hosea. So this, I mean, we can honestly, we can spend all evening just going over verse after verse after verse after verse that says the same thing, that there's more to this than that Abba has been telling us that we just haven't been able to see. Here's Hosea chapter 6, verse 6. He says, "For I delight in loving commitment," the commitment of the heart, and not offerings, not slaughterings. It's not the altar at the end of the temple. It's the heart that he wants. And in the knowledge, that is the understanding of the mysteries of Elohim, more than an ascending offering. So the ascending offerings were important. They laid a groundwork, but Abba was always looking for his people to understand. And they were supposed to understand by the time Messiah came, but they didn't. And so the leadership rejected him. But they were supposed to. Here's Mark chapter 12, verse 33. So this is not just, Abba's been telling us this for a long time. Messiah tells us the same thing. They ask him, what's the greatest commandment? And Messiah's answer is, and to love him, that is Father, with all the heart. Well, we already know what the heart is. The heart is the altar. It's the place where you don't want slaughter offerings. You want the heart, those offerings. To love him, this is the Shema, obviously he's referring to, and to love him with all the heart and with all the understanding, which is what David just said. I understand now. I see. You give me ears to see. Well, yeah, ears to hear and eyes to see. You don't really see with your ears. With all the understanding, with all the truth, and with all the being, and with all strength, and to love one's neighbor as thyself. So 2 different commandments, the Shema and right out of Leviticus 19. And he says, these two, look at what he says. Look at this, guys. Come on, look at this. It's underlined right here. What is all of that about? Is more than all ascending offerings and offerings. This is the words of the Master. These are the words of the Messiah. So he's telling us what David was figuring out, but it wasn't just David, what Hosea was figuring out. It wasn't just David, what Samuel was figuring out. People were starting to figure out, but they didn't get the whole picture yet because Messiah had not yet come. Here is 1 Samuel chapter 15 and verse 22. This is the whole thing with Saul and him, messing up royally. It says, then Samuel said, does Yah delight in ascending offerings and slaughterings as in obeying or understanding the voice of Elohim? Look, to obey God's instruction is better than slaughterings. Because if you understand, then you understand what the slaughterings were really about. You understand the application in your life. You understand the bigger story. And that's what this is really supposed to be about. We're supposed to understand the bigger story. So look, to obey is better than slaughterings, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. So all the way back in Samuel's day, he realized it's not about offerings. It's not about slaughterings. It's not about bulls and goats and lambs and blood. And though that has a purpose and it's real and it's literal and it's the letter, there's so much more to it. Here's the book of Micah, chapter 6, verses 6 to 8. Just more testimony. With what shall I come before Yah? Bow myself before the high Elohim. Shall I come to him with ascending offerings, with calves a year old? Is Yah pleased with thousands of rams or 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my being? He has declared to you, O man, what is good? And what does Yah require of you? But to do right, to understand, and to love, loving commitment in the heart, the altar, and to walk humbly with your Elohim. That has always been the purpose. That has always been the intent. But it got lost in the sauce somewhere over the years. And part of the reason that it got lost is that the ancient house of Israel, for a long time, they defiled the letter. They wouldn't even be obedient to the letter. And if you're not obedient in the little things, there is no way Abba is going to give you bigger things. And that's a great principle for all of us to remember. If you cannot be obedient in the little things, if you can't do the little things, Abba's not going to tell you why you need to do the little things. Everybody wants to know, what do I eat or not eat, or what do I do or not do, or, what day do I worship on, or what calendar, this and that and the other thing. Listen, if we can't be faithful in the little things, Abba's never going to tell you why you do those things, what they really mean. He wants us to know what they really mean. But we got to wrap our minds around the little. We got to be obedient in the little things first. So here's the book of Amos, just more testimony about Israel's defilement of the letter, of the literal, of the copy, of the temple, of the tabernacle. Amos chapter 5, verse 21 and verse 24. It says, I have hated, I have despised your feast days, your festivals, and I am not pleased with your assemblies, your solemn assemblies. Though you offer me ascending offerings and your grain offerings, I do not accept them. You have defiled the copy. Rather than doing everything I said Moses to instruct Moses to tell you to do, you've defiled it all. Nor do I look on your fatted peace offerings. Take away from me the noise of your songs. That's worship and praise. So if you're worshiping and praising, but you don't understand why you're worshiping and praising, you don't understand what the bigger story is, boy, that's a real problem. For I do not hear the sound of your stringed instruments, and let right ruling roll on like water, and righteousness like a mighty stream. Do the literal, understand, be obedient to the literal, and you'll understand the bigger. Here's Isaiah chapter 1, verse 13. Same idea. They defiled the copy. Stop bringing futile offerings. Incense. It is an abomination to me. What they were doing, even though they were, going through the process, it was an abomination to Father. New moons, Sabbaths, the calling of gatherings. I am unable to bear unrighteousness and assembly. My being hates your new moons and your feast days, your appointed times. They are trouble to me. I am weary of bearing them. Why? Because they defiled the letter. So if you're defiling the letter, if you're defiling the letter and you're still going through the process, well, there's no way for you to understand what it means. And you're defiling, you're mixing up the very letter so that others can't understand what it actually means. Here's 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 5, which now when you read 2 Timothy, you realize what Saul's talking about when he's talking to Timothy. He's talking about these things we just went through. He says here about believers, about the leadership, about the letter of his day, about the temple of his day, about the tabernacle of his day, having a form of reverence, having a form of religion, but denying, not understanding its power or its meaning, the truth, and turn away from these type of people. For among them are those who creep into households to captivate silly women, loaded down with sins and led away by various lusts, always learning, always going to school, always going to yeshiva, always going to Bible college, always going to seminary, but never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. That is the spiritual meaning from the letter to the spirit. And as Jonas and Jambres opposed Moses, and he's talking about in the wilderness, the two priests from Egypt, so do these also oppose the truth. So the people that have a form of godliness, all right, we want a temple, we want a red heifer, we support something in Jerusalem, we want the Temple Mount. Well, that's a form of godliness, but they don't understand the truth, because that's not the truth. That's a deception. These also oppose the truth. Men of corrupt minds, their hearts, their altars are corrupt, just like the temples of old, found worthless concerning the faith. So this isn't new. This is everywhere. But until you have eyes to see it, you just don't see it. So what's the spiritual truth here? Remember I told you 3 different things. Number 1 was the tent, the tabernacle, the temple, a body, a house where Father chooses to dwell. Well, here is its true meaning. Here is the true temple. Here's the true tabernacle. For we know that if the tent, the tabernacle, the temple of our earthly house, he's talking about our bodies. He's talking about this. This is the temple of Elohim. This is what it was always about. And there's an even bigger thing, because this is what he's saying here, that if our earthly body, this temple, is destroyed, we have a building, a true tabernacle there from Elohim. A house not made with hands, that is with human tools. This is going to be really important in a second, because the stones of an altar are not supposed to be hewn stones. You're not supposed to put a tool. You're not supposed to put iron to it for a reason. We'll see what that reason is in a second. Not made with human hands, everlasting in the heavens. For indeed in this we groan. In this tabernacle we groan, longing to put on our dwelling which is from heaven. This isn't talking about speaking in another language or doing anything like that. It's talking about in this tabernacle we suffer. In this tabernacle we go through all sorts of garbage. In this tabernacle we go through all sorts of tribulation, and we suffer and we groan through it. But we know that if we're faithful in this tabernacle, according to understanding of the letter, but now the spiritual application of those laws, we know, for indeed if we in this we groan, longing to put on our dwelling which is from heaven, so that having put it on, we shall not be found naked. He's talking about resurrection. He's talking about resurrection, guys. For indeed we are in this tent, this body, this house. We groan, we suffer, being burdened. Not because we wish to put it off. Nobody wants to die. Nobody wants to die, right? Everybody sort of say everybody wants to go to heaven. Nobody wants to die. Of course, nobody wants to die. But we groan with all the stuff we're going through, but to put on the other, the resurrection, so that what is to die might be swallowed up by life. So what's the true spiritual meaning? Father has a high priest serving in that temple, and he is still offering spiritual sacrifices. Where? On an altar. Where is that altar? Here. It's here. 1 Corinthians 6:19 says, or do you not know that your body is the temple, the dwelling place of the set-apart Spirit who is in you, which you have from Elohim? Guys, it doesn't get any more plain than this. It's not like Saul's hiding it. He's telling us this outright, and yet we still don't see it. Things have changed. It's not a building built by men. It is a building built by Abba, and you are part of that building. A dwelling place set apart in the Spirit who is in you, which you have from Elohim, and you are not your own, for you were bought. You were redeemed with a price. What's the price? The blood of the Passover lamb, which is an altar sacrifice, which is a temple sacrifice. Therefore, esteem, be holy. According to the copy of everything that was said about the temple prior to, you be holy with Elohim in your body and in your spirit, which is the heart, the altar, which are of Elohim. Let's go through. I know I'm running out of time here. The slaughterings, the first slaughtering that gets given. The first one that's given, just like in the Torah, the first one that's given is the Passover. And then later on, the instruction of the high priest on how to do the Passover. Here is, put on your spiritual thinking caps, because we're looking at the spiritual end of this now. Is there still a slaughter offering? Because if Messiah is the high priest and there is a temple and our hearts are the altar, is there still a morning oblation and an evening oblation? Are there still sacrifices being given upon the altar? Sin sacrifices, or gifts and offerings and burnt offerings? The answer is Yes, just not the way we would think about it in a physical temple. That's done. But here's how the scripture tells us it's still going on. Revelation chapter 5 and verse 6. And I looked, and I saw in the midst of the throne, that is the Ark of the Covenant, the throne room of Elohim, and of the 4 living creatures, in the midst of the elders, a lamb. What lamb? A Passover lamb. So this is a temple sacrifice. Standing, having been slain. Where? On the altar. On the altar, it was already slain. So we say all the time, because you hear this all the time, you need to accept, whatever the name is, into your heart. Well, that's the altar. And we're going to see what that really means in just a second, because there's a real issue with that. But anyway, so here's this lamb. It was slain. It was offered on the altar, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of Elohim, meaning this lamb has the spirit of Elohim without measure. Of course, we're talking about the Messiah sent out into all the earth. Here's 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, just again telling us about this. So this is temple language. Messiah is the high priest and the offering, the blood given. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7 says, therefore cleanse out the old leaven, the dead religion, the thing that has an outer resemblance of reverence, but is not reverent at all. Get out the old leaven, the dead religion, the letter, the milk, the copy, so that you are a new lump, as you are unleavened. For also our Messiah, the Pesach, the Passover lamb, in the true tabernacle, was slaughtered, just like every other Passover lamb has to be. So then understanding this, let us celebrate the festival. Let us celebrate Passover, not with the old leaven, the tradition and the religion of men, nor with the leaven of evil and wickedness, the Easter ham. We'll talk about that in a second. But with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth, with spiritual understanding of the truth, moving from literal to spiritual. What an amazing story. So the true altar then is our heart, and it is still a place of sacrifice. The heart of the tabernacle is where the sacrifices were done, the Passover, the gifts, the slaughter offerings are present. Here's 1 Corinthians 11. Should be really familiar to you guys. Pay close attention to the PDP version here, because I think you're going to see something. Verse 23 says, this is Saul speaking, for I received from the Master, from King Yeshua, that which I also delivered to you, that the Master Messiah, in the night in which he was delivered up, took bread, and having given thanks, he broke it and said, take, eat, this is my body. This is the spiritual sacrifice of the king, or of the Passover, which is broken. His death is going to be poured out on the altar of our hearts for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Every Passover, when we have Passover, we are supposed to remember this. In the same way also, the cup after supper, saying, this cup is the renewed covenant in my blood, the blood poured out on the altar, on the heart. As often as you drink it, that is the Passover. And what's crazy is that it's this. He's talking about the Passover, doing this on Passover, but it has always been Hebrew tradition to memorialize what Abraham did with Melchizedek every Shabbat with wine and bread. And what they never realized is that they were memorializing each Shabbat. When you have challah and you have wine, you are commemorating, you are looking forward to the coming Passover lamb, the coming cup, and the coming bread. So it says, do this in remembrance of me, for as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup on Shabbat, well, really on Passover, you proclaim the spiritual truth of Passover, the death of the Master until he comes, so that whoever should eat this bread and drink this cup of the Master unworthily. So let me give you an example of drinking and eating this cup in an unworthy manner. When you eat and you drink it as the Easter ham, that's blasphemy. That's not the Passover lamb. You do that. You're doing, even though you have the idea of, you think you have an idea, you are putting something on your heart. Because what we say, you need to accept it into your heart. You are putting something on the altar that is not the Passover lamb, but is in fact, I'm just going to throw it out there. We'll talk more about it later. It is the abomination of desolation. You are putting a ham, a wild boar, on the heart, not the Passover lamb. I'll talk more about that later. I know I'm lots of amazing stuff coming. So whoever eats this bread and drinks this cup in an unworthy manner shall be guilty of the body and the blood of the master. But let a man examine himself, purify himself, because you can't go to the altar. You can't get into the temple. The teachings of the temple is you had to be purified. You had to be washed. You had to be forgiven. You had to have blood spilt on your heart, needed to be in the right place. All of that still applies in our temple. Shall be guilty, but let a man examine himself, purify on the altar, and so let him eat of the bread and drink of that cup. For the one who is drinking and eating in an unworthy way, like the Easter ham, replacing the Easter pig for the Passover lamb, eats and drinks judgment to himself, not discerning the body, the blood on the altar of the master, who is the Passover lamb. And I put it in red there so it pops out at you. What happens when you do this? Because of this, many are weak and sick among you, and many sleep, dying. Look at where we are today. Look at where we've been for 1,700 years. Saul was talking about it all the way back here. And it has to do with understanding what the true temple is about. Continual sacrifices. Are there still continual sacrifices going on? Yes, because there's still an altar. The high priest, we were already read in Hebrews, gives gifts and slaughter offerings, as well as the Passover. He gives gifts and slaughtering offerings, morning oblation, evening oblation. That is the teaching of the temple. Make it exactly according to the pattern that you saw. That pattern also tells us who Messiah is and what's actually going on now, not in a physical temple, but in this temple, and obviously in the place where Messiah is. The morning and evening oblation, where's it done? On the altar, on the heart. Here's Isaiah chapter 17, verse 7. In that day, man shall look at his maker, and his eyes shall turn to the set apart one of Israel, and he shall not look on the slaughter places. That is the physical altar at the temple. The work of his hands. He shall not see that which his own fingers made, nor the asherim, nor the sun pillars. So what did they put on the altar back in his day? Well, the Easter ham, or the Asherah pole, the worship of Easter, the worship of Tammuz. No different than we're doing today. They did it too, but they did it to the physical temple. We're doing it to this temple. Sun god worship. And I'm going to say it, Christianity. And not just that, moon god worship, Islam. Exodus chapter 20, verse 25. And if you make me a slaughtering place of stone, that is, so this is the instruction of, if you're going to make it a slaughtering place, right? You're going to make an altar. There's requirements, because you got to know the literal to understand the spiritual. And if you make me a slaughtering place of stone, the altar of our heart is that place. Do not build it out of cut stone, not out of man-made religion, not out of, we just finished reading in Isaiah 17, not out of the works of your hands. For if you use a chisel on it, you have profaned it. So this thing that's supposed to be going on in our heart is not of man-made religion, not the working of our own hands. It needs to be an uncut stone. So not only are we the temple, we are actually the bricks, the living stones that are part of, and here's the next verse, 1 Peter verse 2:5, you also as living stones are part of the altar of sacrifice. You are the altar. Within you is the altar. Are being built up into a spiritual house, a set-apart priesthood, to do what? To do what all priests are supposed to do what the high priest is supposed to do. Offer up spiritual slaughter offerings. the daily offerings, the gifts, the sacrifices, the ascending offerings, acceptable to Elohim through the Messiah. That is still going on, or it should still be going on inside of all of us, because that's what it was always supposed to be. Not the thing, not the building. The building was a teaching tool to get us to understand this. Still a temple, still a high priest, still an altar, still a holy of holies. All of that is still true. It's just the reality of it. Romans chapter 12, verse 1. I call upon you, therefore, brothers, through the compassion of Elohim, to present your bodies as living offerings, living sacrifices. We are still, Messiah is still giving sacrifices every day. He's still doing morning oblation. It's still happening, but it's happening on a spiritual level across the world, not just in a building in the Middle East. The daily sacrifice, the morning and evening oblation, set apart and well-pleasing to Elohim, which is your reasonable worship. And do not be conformed to this world, to the religion of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Realize the bigger story, the spiritual truth of all of this, so that you can prove what is the good and well-pleasing and perfect or eternal desire of Elohim. You did not desire slaughter offerings. You did not desire new moons and sacrifices and all the rest of that. A willing heart. A willing heart. The calves of your lips. The bullocks of your heart. That's what Abba's always wanted. And where does he want to dwell? In the midst of his people. Revelation chapter 5, verse 9. So are offerings still being given? Yes. And until the last offering is done, when the last offering is done, then this story will wrap up. Here's Revelation chapter 5, verse 9. Guys, get this. You got to get this. This is so cool. Listen to this. And when he opened up the fifth seal, I saw under the slaughter place, which is the altar or the heart of man, the beings, the souls of those who had been slain, died, who were sacrificed while proclaiming spiritual truth for the word of Elohim and for the witness. What witness? The witness that Yeshua is the high priest and he is the Passover lamb. So these are people that have died for the truth. They were sacrificed, which was their reasonable service. Now I know, man, this is opening up a whole new can of worms, but this is what it means. Because we're talking about real death here, which they held, and they cried with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Master, set apart and true, until you judge and avenge our blood? So these people were killed. They were killed as a sacrifice, just like every other lamb, every other goat, every other bullock, every other thing, except it was on their altar, their heart. They died. They were an offering that was presented by the high priest in the temple before Father. A sacrifice, which is our reasonable service on those who dwell on the earth. And there was given to each one of them a white robe, and they were told that they should rest a little while longer. Until when? Until both the number of their fellow servants and their brothers who would be killed as they were. Beloved, I know we don't want to hear this. I know it's tough to wrap our mind around. I know it seems like we're living in a different age, but the truth is the truth. Until the full number of those who would be killed as they were, until all the sacrifices and gifts and daily offerings, which have been going on now for 2,000 years, is completed. And it's not completed yet. It's not completed. The Master is still offering up offerings before Father, and we are it. We are it. I know it's a very different story than what you're used to hearing. But beloved, that is the true temple. And we need to wrap our minds around it. There's still a temple. There's still offerings. There's still a priesthood. There's still a holy of holy. All of those things. And we'll talk about the tabernacle. I mean, the menorah and all the rest of that, because all the furnishings mean something. They have a spiritual meaning. But we must wrap our mind around this. If we are going to truly understand what the story is about and what the transgression of desolation is and what the abomination of desolation truly is, because it is not the literal. It cannot be. It has been transferred from the literal to the spiritual, a much bigger reality than we could ever imagine. And yet, what are we all doing? All amongst the religious world? We're all messing with the milk. We're all messing with the Lord, with the letter. We're all messing with the old wine. And that goes across the board for everybody, all of us, all across the board. We're still doing the same thing. We're arguing over silly things, the shape of the earth and all the rest of it. We're arguing over silly things, and we're missing the point. The point is, you are the temple of Elohim. You are the true temple, and your heart is the altar. We'll get more into this next week when we get together, guys. Again, don't forget that. In fact, I don't even think I said it earlier. That let me go back to the beginning slide here, just to give you guys a little bit of a reference here. And I'm going to zip through all of this really quick. Let me not do this so you guys get dizzy watching it. But I wanted to show you the calendar just real quick for a second, because I neglected to mention this before. There we go. This is the October. The September calendar. Let me pop this up for you guys. This upcoming Friday is normally our Hidden Manna. Brother Max is away. He's visiting family down in Texas, and he's not going to be back for a week. So that would be this date on the 8th. We're not going to have Hidden Manna again until, here it is. Oh, I'm sorry, I went a little bit too far. Until the 13th. Which would be Friday, October the 13th. So Brother Max is going to be away. So I know we haven't had Hidden Manna a little bit. We've been having all sorts of technical difficulties. Please, guys, pray for us that we can get all this stuff out of the way and fix these technical difficulties that we're having, and be able to present all this information to you as best as we can. But in the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed that study. Don't forget to download the calendar. It'll be updated on our app real soon, so that you know all the dates of everything that's coming up, and share this with somebody. Share this with somebody. This is important. This is really important. Guys, have an awesome rest of the evening. Enjoy your evening. We will see you tomorrow, or hear you tomorrow. You'll hear me tomorrow morning during our morning manna. And then I'll see you this upcoming weekend for Shabbat service. Guys, have an awesome rest of the day. Yah bless. And of course, peace. Shalom.